South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has confirmed that the death toll linked to ongoing protests in the country has risen to 10. He addressed citizens there tonight, explaining the reason for deploying the military to affected area. Almost 500 people have been arrested as a result of the unrest. Joining me now is political analyst Tessa Dooms. Good to see you, Tessa, and thanks for your time. Now, the protesters and looters, they started on Thursday. Tonight is the first decisive action Ramaphosa has taken. So what do you make of this?
I think that this is a very late intervention into this, and not only given what has happened in the last few days, but given the fact that this is ultimately a political issue first. And we know that since around January, February this year, there have been rumblings from within the ANC and from within different political factions talking about mobilizing around this moment, around the moment that a defense of Jacob Zuma would be necessary to make sure that he stays out of jail, or in this case now is released from jail. And so you would have hoped that the president and the ANC leadership at large had been working on this issue for many, many months, as opposed to responding in a moment of crisis. But it seems that this is now a knee-jerk reaction, as opposed to a very measured and considered action that has both a grassroots element to it, as well as a security and law enforcement element.
Well, Tessa, just like you've said, some think that the president is speaking too late. But again, some others are also saying that the army coming into the fray will mean, some form of heavy handedness, on the protesters. Do you think it is something that should be left alone to the police in South Africa?
I mean, that's a double-edged sword question. We do know that the army has had a history of being heavy-handed when dealing with civilians. We saw it a year ago when we had our first hard lockdown. The army in South Africa is simply not trained for things like crowd control. And so to bring the army into a civilian territory really does put civilians at great risk. But on the other hand, you also have the South African Police Service, the SAPS, who do seem very overwhelmed by the situation and not able to control it. But I think the middle ground between these two should not be immediately to go to the military, but to use your intelligence services effectively so that you can have the kind of information that can stop what's happening in its tracks, rather than just enforce the law. I think at this point, when you add violence to a violent situation, you are really not sure what the outcome might be, and we may actually see more bloodshed as opposed to the chaos being decreased.
Well, talking about uncertainty of actions, do you think that this is what Africans are watching in South Africa at the moment? Because on the one hand, a lot of people thought that it was because of former President Jacob Zuma that they went out in protest. But a lot of people's houses and shops have been looted. Does this mean that this is about some other things other than what it is?
I mean, there's certainly a coalition of two issues here. We have on the one issue a real political battle that's happening within the ANC that we are seeing starting to spill out into the rest of society. We cannot ignore the idea that calls for President Jacob Zuma's release are calls that are part of the discourse and the narrative that is in the streets. And whether that is a real or imagined thing for all protesters is neither here nor there. But it is indicative of the idea that behind this, and there is some mobilization here, there are certainly some directed efforts in getting people into different communities and different townships. And you could only imagine that part of that is still about the political agenda and the factional battles that the ANC needs to resolve for itself. But when you put that into the mix with a society that is frustrated, a society that has a lot of economic challenges, and many, many people who are living under not only poverty, but high levels of inequality. We've got the most unequal society in the world in South Africa. You then put together those two elements and you get the kind of chaos that you see, where people are saying, I have very little to lose, and therefore when I am given the opportunity to participate in something that is perhaps chaotic, but also would allow me to get some food supplies or get something that I wouldn't be able to ordinarily get. It does become a way for people to participate in that for their economic needs, but also a sign that people are frustrated and want their voices to be heard and their needs to be attended to.
You know, from former President Jacob Zuma to what we're saying at the moment, do you think the ruling ANC is losing, you know, its popularity by what we're saying in the country?
Well, I certainly think this is a definite moment of reflection for the ANC and a moment in which it has to take stock. Whether or not it's losing its broad support, I think we've already started to see in the ways in which elections over the last few cycles have gone, that people aren't only losing faith in a particular political party, but they're losing faith in the electoral system and in political parties in general. And so the ANC in this moment has an opportunity to either show leadership or to start to capitulate, where people who are still supporters of the ANC look at this and say, well, the ANC is not showing leadership. Even those people who are looting in the streets are asking for leadership from their government, asking for leadership from the ANC. And if this moment does turn into one that is just not salvageable for the ANC, they will certainly see the effects of that at the upcoming elections locally, and of course in 2024 when we have another national election.
So, Tessa, before I let you go, let's talk about solutions. Apart from the military, which you have also agreed with others as being, you know, high-handed in its, you know, handling of this and not being trained with the requisite, you know, training, what else can the government do to get South Africans back to their homes and their offices and restore normalcy?
Well, I think there are two strategies that are needed in this situation. The first is to actually go to ground. The ANC, as a government and as a political party, have always spoken about the fact that they have a strong coverage across this country, that they have people who are leaders in every ward and every part of the country. And it is those leaders that need to be brought in. It's those community leaders that need to be gathered and told, this is how we're going to deal with this. They need information about who it is that has the most sway in different communities, and they need to be in the ground and in communities in order to figure out how to talk their way through this rather than just bring in the military. But the second part of this is crucially important, and you need strong leadership. We need to see a country that is giving some support in terms of the different facets of government, not only law enforcement. There needs to be a health response, there definitely needs to be a social development response here. And people need to feel like their frustrations and their needs are going to be met if the looting stops. That's the only way to respond here, is a developmental response as opposed to a purely force.
Well, Tessa Dooms, many thanks for unpacking this for us.